the gates, the sha'arim hametsuyanim bahalacha. So it's a word play on the word Sion, that excel in halacha more. He preferences them above synagogues and study halls. I'm guessing that's not what they expected to hear when you want to hear words in praise of synagogue, that you say, actually, that's not what God really wants. God really likes the places where they study halacha, where they're mitsuyanim bahalacha. Okay, and we'll come back to this because I want to do this with the Ben Yehoyada. So, but let's get the basic foundation text on this. Okay. V'hainu de'amar Rabbi Chia bar Ami mishmei de'ula. And this is that which Rabbi Chia bar Ami said in the name of Ula. So these are third generation into Ula, if memory serves, is a second generation Amora. So you're going back even further. So this comports with what Ula said. Miyom sheharav Beit Hamikdash, from the day that he destroyed or was destroyed the Holy Temple. Ein lo lahakadosh baruch hu ba'olamo. God has nothing in God's world. Ella arba amot shel halacha bilvad, other than the 4 cubits of halacha alone. Knowing, what does that mean? And we'll come back to it. But I want to get the full text before we look back and go, what are they actually talking about here? Okay. V'amar Abaye. And Abaye said, and again here Steinsaltz saying this has practical ramifications, which is interesting in its own right. Meresh hava garesna begol beta. So originally, merosh, I would study at home, mitzalena bevei chanishta, and I would pray in the Beit Knesset. Kevan de shamana laha de amar Rabbi Chia bar Ami mishmei de'ula, since I heard that which Rabbi Chia bar Ami said in the name of Ula, namely, and this is again a quote that we just read, Miyom shecharav Beit Hamikdash, ein lo lahakadosh baruch hu ba'olamo, ela arba amot shel halacha bilvad, that since the temple was destroyed, God has no domain in God's world other than the 4 cubits of halacha. La hava mitzalena ela hecha degaresna. I do not pray except where I study. All right, and then to give further emphasis to this teaching, Rabbi Ami ve Rabbi Asi, these 2 great sages, Afal gav de havoloho tresar be kanishta b'Tiveria, despite the fact that there were 13 synagogues in Tiberias where they dwelled, la mitzalu ela bene amude hecha dehavu garse. They would only pray between the pillars of where they studied. So at the study hall, and not in one of the 13 synagogues that were then present in Tiberias. Okay, so that's the text. That's the face of the text. So I want to go back and look at some of this text. And by the way, I assume you can unmute yourselves, or if you've got questions, please interrupt with impunity. But I want to look at this text with the commentary of the Ben Yehoyada, better known as the Ben Ish Chai, who is from Baghdad. He's a heavy hitter, to say the least. So I want to see what he does with this text, because it's really interesting. And then I want to get to what I think the text is saying, which let's do him first. Okay, we're over here. Ohev Hashem sha'arim hametzuyanim b'halacha yoter mibatei chnesiot u'batei midrashot. God prefers the gates that excel in halacha more than batei knesset, synagogues, u'batei midrashot, and study halls. Perush batei knesiot shemitpalalin bahem. So batei knesset means prayer halls. Uvatei midrashot shekorim bahen mikra u'mishnah. So study halls means that where they study written text, that was the text of the Tanakh, and Mishnah. Ach hametzuyanim, however, the ones who excel, those other batei midrash, shalomdim bahem gemara, they study Gemara, which can here either mean the literal text of the Talmud, or Maimonides actually takes the term Gemara to mean logic. That you think through the implication of the Mikra and the Mishnah. That's what he calls Gemara. Umorim bahem halacha lema'aseh. And they study or they teach therein practical halacha. Mihu, however, tzarich lahavin lama lamakom limud hagmara v'horaat halacha karu lahem leho sha'arei tzion. So we have to understand why they called the places where they learned Gemara and taught halacha, why they call them the gates of Zion. Lema batei tzion, call them the houses of Zion. The same way they call Beit Midrash, Beit Knesset, Beit Tzion. So he's making a very precise read of the language of the Gemara. Ush'arim, and the gates, man dekar shemayhu, why do they call them by name of the gates? V'alo halimud lifnimhu, because the actual study doesn't happen at the gates, it happens inside of the gates. So why is it all about the gates? V'nireli, so it appears to me, shedarkam lahaniach shomer al hapetach. It appears to me that their practice was to place a guard at the door. B'makom shalomdim gemara umorim halacha, in those places where they would study Gemara and teach halacha. Kedei shelo yikanes sham adam she'eno hagun, in order that a person who is unfit for this, either by disposition or preparation, they're not ready yet, that such a person should not enter. O shuhu echad min hakaraim v'ha'epikorsim, or he's one of the Karaites, or one of the heretics. V'yishma midivrei Torah shemedabrim bahem chachamim, and he would hear the Torah that they're teaching therein, that the sages are working or promulgating. Ulefi zeh siman shezeh beit midrash shel limud gemara v'halachot hu min mekom hashar, that the gate itself is an indicator of what's going on the inside, that this is, as it were, a protected zone, that there are certain people that they don't want to be privy to the conversation. And so the tzion there is not just excellence, it actually gets back to the gate itself. Since there is a guard at the gate, which is unusual, so this tells you that this is a specialized Beit Midrash dedicated to Gemara and Halacha. Therefore, they gave it the name. The Talmud focused on the sha'ar of it. So this is already kind of an interesting read on it. I'm not sure what to make of it in terms of, we have in earlier texts when they Bo Bayom, that day that they overthrew Rabban Gamliel, that they expanded the size of the Beit Midrash, that students who had formerly not been allowed to attend were now permitted to attend, to expand the amount of Torah, whatever qualitative effect that may have had on the quality of the Torah they were learning. And so you've got this public policy back and forth. Okay, now we've got an even funner teaching of the Ben Ish Chai. Miyom shecharav Beit Hamikdash, ein lo lahakadosh baruch hu ba'olamo. Since the day of the destruction of the temple, God has no domain in God's world. Yesh lomar. So you can ask the following question. Lama talazeh b'churban. Why did he hang this literally with the churban? In other words, what's the connection to the destruction of the temple? Ve'im ratzono lomar, if he wanted to say, Bizman mikdash kayam yesh korbanot, that in the time when you had a temple standing, they offered sacrifice, ve'ata ha'halachot hem b'makom korbanot, and so today the halacha, the study of halacha, the teaching of halacha, stands in place of the sacrifices. Im kain lama naket halacha lema Torah. Why does it specify in the text halacha? Let it say Torah. Kamosha ne'emar, and so now he's going to give you another midrashic unpacking. So this is the first part of this is, as you can see, it has vowels in it. Zot haTorah la'olah. This is the Torah regarding the olah sacrifice. Kol hakore parashat olah ki'ilu hikriv olah. One who recites the parsha regarding the olah, it's as if he had offered an olah offering. So in other words, studying the thing is tantamount to offering the thing. So if that's what they wanted to say, why did they say halacha and not the word Torah, which is what you would expect, given that we have a midrashic unpacking that does exactly that? Venerally, so it appears to me, and now he gets edgy. It's going to get even edgier, but he gets edgy. Dekodem churban lo haya shikha ba'olam. That before the destruction, there was no forgetting in the world. There was no forgetting halacha. Now, of course, there were cases of dispute. Hillel and Shammai and the houses they founded predate the destruction of the Second Temple. So you already had the beginning of dispute within the rabbinic community. But let's run with it. That there was certainly not as much forgetting of halacha before the destruction because they had an intact civilization. They had a culture that worked. V'hayu halachot sudurot b'fi hachachamim kamo shenitnu misinai. And the halachot were fit in the mouth. They were set in the mouths of the sages, just as they'd been given at Sinai. Like I said, run with it. Okay. So that's when you have a temple standing, when you have an intact civilization. V'achara churban nasa tigvoret lakalia v'gavra hashikha. That after the destruction, I don't know how to translate this. This is where I need Haim the exact, how he would translate this exactly. Oppression and forgetting happened because of the oppression. That something changed, something fundamental changed. Because you don't have a temple, you don't have a central authority, you don't have a living civilization the way you had before the destruction. V'nishkechu ribui hahalachot. And depending how you parse the word ribui here, can either mean thousands of halachot or even arguably the majority of the halachot. The how you live in the world was forgotten because they no longer had a civilization in which you didn't need individual memory. You could rely on collective memory. V'rubam mitchadshim otam chachmei Yisrael b'chol dor vador al yedei pilpulam. So instead what happened, the majority of the halachot were renewed. The chadesh is to renew, to refresh, to invigorate. I don't know how else to translate it. In yeshivish, it's to make a chiddush is a big thing, to find something in the text. Okay, so the sages of Israel in every generation using pilpul, which here I would translate as logic, analytics, that before you could rely on received tradition and common knowledge. Everybody knew what you were supposed to do. Now you have to use logic and analytical skills to figure it out. Uchmosha asa Othniel ben Kenaz, and this is just as Othniel ben Kenaz had done be'otam halachot shenishkachu be'evlo shel Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom, as were done regarding the halachot that were forgotten during the mourning period of Moshe Rabbeinu, peace be upon him. There's a rabbinic midrash that in the mourning period for Moses, for them, the ultimate emotional trauma, as a collective, the Israelites forgot thousands of halachot. And so the story is they went to Joshua and said, ask the Urim v'Tumim. In other words, Moses asked God, what's the halacha? You go ask the oracle that we have, the Urim and the Tumim, to tell us what the halacha is. And they said, no, we can't do that. That direct revelation, at least a legal revelation, you still had prophecy in this era, but legislation that prophecy that had legislative authority, that period is now ended. And so we can't go ask God, what do we do? We have to use midrash. We have to use ways of reading the text carefully, being mechadesh the text, looking to see what's in the text so we can find anew, either to restore or to make new for new circumstances, the Torah, without a tradition and without revelation. And here's where the Ben Ish Chai goes really edgy. He'll go even further, all right. V'hinei, behold, kol davar shehu nitchadesh v'yotzei la'or al yedei adam, anything that is renewed and comes to light by human hands, in this case by human minds, hu chaviv lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is beloved by the Holy, blessed be He. Wow. This is, the rabbis are giving themselves, the Ben Ish Chai ex post facto is giving not just divine imprimatur, this is saying this is a beloved way of doing things. Ulezeh amar, and that's why the text says, Miyom shecharav Beit HaMikdash, since the day of the destruction of the temple, shegavra hashikha, wherein forgetfulness, loss of memory had happened, she'az rov ha'halachot mitchadshot al yedei chachamim, where now the majority of halachot, of the halachic system, were renewed, refreshed, restored by means of the sages. Ein lo lahakadosh baruch hu ba'olamo ela arba amot shel halacha bilvad. That the only domain, the only place where God rules is the 4 cubits of halacha, which is of course itself a construction of the halacha. Ki az halachot ha'ele hem chavivim lefanav, because these very halachot are beloved before God. May God be blessed. Okay. And now he goes, on the face of it, Kabbalistic, I would actually say emotative here. Uma shekatav ba'olamo velo amar ba'olam. So why does it say in God's world as opposed to in the world? So grammatically, this is a common thing in Aramaic, which made its way into a Hebrew, to use a double possessive. So ribono shel olam, it's master of the universe. It's a common usage, but here he's making a diuk, a precision read of this text. So why does it say this? Nireli ki hakadosh baruch hu kinui letiferet. That this is a nickname, as it were, for the Sephirah of Tiferet, of beauty. Ve'olam hatiferet hu hayetzirah, and the world in which the Sephirah of Tiferet inhabits, and I'm not going to explain this in any length because if you get it, you get it. If you don't get it, ask somebody else, is the realm of Yetzirah, is the world of creation. Velimud haTorah hu biyitzirah, and the study of Torah is in the realm of creation. That this creativity that the sages use by using logic, by using analysis to create new law, to reconstruct law out of the Torah, even absent a received tradition. Shehi olamo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is the realm of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy Blessed One, Shehu Sod HaTiferet, which is the secret of beauty. And I'll go no more further into that part. This is a Hamevin Yavin teaching, but it's still, if you get it, it's a wow. So let me give you my spin then on the text, and then we'll completely open it up. So hang on. So we have this text that you expect to be a praise of synagogue. And it turns out that, in fact, Rav Chisda isn't praising synagogues. He's saying they're secondary, maybe even tertiary. And that God's domain is halacha. And I'm going to use the halacha here writ large. But if you're looking to find God in the world, where do you go? Well, when there was a temple, you went to find God, as it were, in Jerusalem. That's where, kiviyachol, as it were, God lived. We speak about the devir beitecha, the inner apartment of your house, which in fact, of course, was empty, but that's a whole nother teaching. So in an era where the temple exists, where do you go to find God? Where does God live? Where does God have dominion? The temple itself. That's God's house. Without that house, where do you find God? And the answer is, if you're looking for God in Shul, you're looking in the wrong place. If you're looking for God in mystical texts, if you're looking for God in the Torah, for that matter, you're not going to find God there. You're not going to really find God there. Where are you going to find God? In the halacha, in the practical lived expression of the Torah. That's where you find God. And that's all I have to say on this text. So please come at me with questions. Come at me with comments.
I have one quick thought.
Please.
In regard to that statement, it jumped out right at me because I've been isolating this particular portion in the Siddur in the mornings for Shacharit, but it states, Tana Dabi Eliyahu Kol Hashone Halachot B'chol Yom Muftach Lo Shehu Ben Ha'olam Haba Shene'emar Halichot.
Olam Lo. Yep.
It's like it's like the statement jumps out every day. Whoever studies halachot every day, he's assured life in the world to come. For it says, the pathways halichot of the world are his. Do not pronounce the word halichot, but halachot.
Yep.
Wow. And I think the meaning is kind of what you were already saying. Is you're not going to find God in the house of prayer. You're going to find God in living your life. Not to say prayer is important, but halacha is the way you walk, the way you go. You'll find God the way you live, how you treat people, your relationships, your life. This is where you will find God.
Yeah. Most people would not think to look for theology, to look for godliness in the dry pages of a legal codex. But that's in fact exactly what this statement is saying, which, by the way, also explains, now that I see Haim here, thank you for joining us as always, why the focus on halacha lema'aseh. Why is that so important? That's because that's where the Judaism is. That's where the God is, as it were. I actually want to go even further. I want to amplify what you said, Nathanael. When it says Kol hashoneh halachot b'chol yom muvtach lo shehu ben olam haba. It doesn't say he will get olam haba. He says he is ben olam haba, right here, right now.
Wow. Yeah.
There's a Hasidic story, and please somebody fill me in on the particular Rebbe it was, where one of his Hasidim came to him and says, Rebbe, Mashiach's here. And so he gets up from his table and he opens the window and he sticks his head outside and he takes a whiff and he closes the window and he says, not yet. What's the meaning of that story? For this Rebbe, he's living olam haba. He's living in the world which is coming. Remember, haba, there is a present participle. It's not olam sheyavo, it's olam haba. The world which is coming now, it's in the process of coming. He's already there. He's already had that degree of enlightenment. In his little room, a hole in the wall, he's living in the Messianic era. So when his chassid says to him, Mashiach's here, and he goes outside and he smells, in particular, from the version I heard, takes a whiff, and he goes, no, still smells like a world which isn't quite yet redeemed. We're working on it. But yeah, if you study halacha, if you actualize it, you're living in a world that's already begun to be redeemed, right here, right now.
Can
Thank you for
I
sharing, Nathaniel. That was great.
devil's advocate here?
Go for it.
So I loved what you said, Nathaniel. That's beautiful, and I think that's a truth. It also feels a little bit like this is apologetics in the sense of, I get that they're saying those people who are sitting in the Beit Midrash making the halachot are up in the world of Yetzirah, meaning they're at a higher divine level, and therefore they're getting divine intervention in their writings. So it's not just logical, but it's divinely inspired logical.
I don't think that's what I don't think that's what the Ben Ish Chai is using Yetzirah here as. It could be. I'm not a devotee of Kabbalah to that point, so I can't speak to it. But the word Yetzirah itself is yatzar, creation. Not creation ex nihilo, but creation from something else. And that's exactly what the rabbis are doing here. They're creating halacha from earlier materials. They're reinterpreting it. They're reinvigorating the text. And so it's God as creative force in the world. So I don't think it's that they're getting some kind of divine inspiration, other than that the human mind itself, by its creative capacity, is a vehicle for divine inspiration in its own right. And that's what I think he's getting at.
Except that they're saying that this is the Beit Midrash has a higher spiritual level, if you want to say it that way, than a synagogue where we're praying.
Yep.
So that has to mean that there's more divine presence.
I'm sorry, hang on. I didn't hear the last bit.
Oh, it seems to me
my
that
audio's gone out. All right, hang on. I need to log back. This happens occasionally. I need to log out and log back in. Give me just a moment,
Okay.
please.
I'll answer a question meanwhile, Shayna. I think I think what you're saying is what it has become now. I think that originally that was maybe not the intention of that statement, but unfortunately, the way that people see it now, the importance of learning for the sake of learning is greater than living in the actual world. I was counseling a young man a couple of weeks ago who has a problem with his daughter. She's very stubborn. I said, different ways of tackling the problem. And then he said, yeah, she was very, very, like last night, it was very hard. And until she went to sleep, we had to stay late. And only then I was able to go back to my studies at like 1 a.m. I said, this is where you have a problem. Okay, we can hear you now, Daniel. I'm just,
I'll be back in 5 minutes.
okay, no problem. So So I said, see, this is the problem. You think that raising your daughter is a burden, or like you have to do it, and studying Torah is your goal. It's not. You now, your halacha, you're as a father, you have to take care of your daughter. And if you need to sleep more and skip some learning in order to be able to take care of her needs and not be short-tempered when she talks to you, that's what you need to do. And I think so that's what is happening today. But back then, where in the time of the Talmud, when they said Sharim Metzurim ba'alacha, and they speak about the knowledge of halacha, it means that you take, it's the exact opposite. You take the abstract and you apply it daily to your life. So we always speak about that, the applicable, the applied knowledge. Unfortunately, it's not. It's almost like non-existent today. Rabbi Daniel, Baruch haba. It's interesting that the problems happened just when I came in. Like you're like well, we can't be together on the same screen.
It's like I get to teach the Ben Ish Chai, but I want to hear your spin on it because
I'm not a spinster.
But there is something, they're making that comparison between a synagogue and a Beit Midrash. There's got to be more in that statement.
I told you what I think it's getting at, that they're creating a hierarchy that if you want to really experience the God of Israel, absent a temple, where in some sense it's immediate, where do you go looking? And yeah, it's not saying you can't find it in prayer. Of course you can. But if you're going up the hierarchy, study is a higher place, the Beit Midrash, and in particular the Beit Midrash that's doing halacha, where you're bringing the God of the Torah into the real world. It's not dealing with the supernal realms of whatever. It's dealing with the lived world in which we inhabit. Okay. The rest of the world, that's human beings have domain. That's the Romans, that's the Greeks, that's the Americans, that's the Chinese. But the realm of personal action, of halacha, that God can be master. And so if you want to find that God, that's where you go looking.
But it's more than that, because they're giving an aspect of sanctity to that Beit Midrash, because I don't remember which one it was that's saying, I only now pray in the Beit Midrash where I study halacha. So there's some kind of sanctity that they are saying is imbued into those four walls or inside the gate.
And so I'm not even sure if it's sanctity. It's saying, I want to pray where I study. And there isn't much commentary as to why they make that decision. But they make that decision, that as it were, either their prayers are better heard, maybe their prayer experience is better in the Beit Midrash than it is in the Beit Knesset. I was less focused on that. I mean, it's an aspect of it, but that why the critical focus on halacha? Why is it that the movements disagree so profoundly over halacha? And I would argue that's the battlefield in which the battles of Judaism take place, because that's where the God happens. That's where our experience of God in the world happens. And so that's why the halacha matters. And so doing it right. The other thing, again, the Ben Ish Chai, and perhaps I'm reading too much into it. And historically, as I said, there were disputes before the temple was destroyed. Hillel and Shammai and the houses they created predate the destruction of the temple by a century and a half. And they probably reflect earlier disputes. Although there you could argue that when you had a functioning civilization, you had a Sanhedrin, you had the institutions, you could resolve at least the critical disputes. Note, by the way, that there are disputes that, why did they simply leave it unanswered, unresolved? There were some disputes that they voted on, and there were some that they didn't, because for whatever reason, it was okay doing elu ve'elu. We can live with diversity, even in that era. But it's okay, what do you do when you don't have a received tradition? That's what the shikha is. They couldn't remember what the halacha was because of the exile, because of suffering, whatever it may be. They couldn't do it. And so what do? You have to use the methodologies of the Torah itself to reinvigorate, to renew the Torah itself. And that act is not only required, it's beloved by God. That's an outrageous, in a good way, teaching.
Or I mean that is part probably of the equation. I think also that that time is where the rabbis are aware of the learning process. This is sort of like meta thinking about the process, because they talk about some people who like to study midrash, those who study mikra. They talk a lot about what is it that you need to study, and I think because a lot of this halacha, even though they attribute it to shikha, people don't remember it because it didn't exist 100 years ago. Like it's a new creation. So they want to bring people into that field. We want you to learn the halacha. They're trying to sort of educate the masses that halacha is important. The people don't know what to do because all these halachot are new. So they come and learn with us. But I also think, like I told Shana before, I think that part of it is that the greatness of halacha is when it is translated to the practical world, not taken over world, but helps you elevate it. The olam ha'maseh, olam ha'yitzirah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Was the Ben Ish Chai, did he have contact with like the European Enlightenment?
The Ben Ish Chai? He read all the European newspapers, Ha'melitz, Ha'tefillah, Ha'shahar. He corresponded with rabbis all over the
That's what I thought. So could this
well,
also...
he was a maskil. If had he lived in Germany, they would call him a maskil and probably say you're a heretic. Even though he knew Kabbalah, because he said you could bathe in a mikveh made of ice. You could ride bicycle on Shabbat.
Heresy.
Yeah.
What I'm wondering is, because the Reform movement uses the word temple for synagogue. And this is really saying that the temple is now, the temple is gone to the Beit Midrash in a sense. It's not in the sacrifices, even though we have the prayers to represent the sacrifices, and we can kind of do those sacrifices, but the real essence of that Shekhinah or whatever we had in the temple is now in the Beit Midrash. Is how I was reading that. So I'm wondering if there's some tguvah to that.
I think there is. I mean, one of my teachers said, yeah, the on the pages of the Talmud, that's where the God happens. She's in a process theology, which, okay, but say again.
Right. No. I agree with you. I'm just saying that in that is a phrase that he took from the Talmud that says that the Bet HaMikdash moved into the synagogue. So it's not. And Bet Knesset used to be called Mikdash Me'at, a mini temple. It's only because the Reform movement started calling it temple that we don't use the word temple. So it's always a counter reaction.